Good morning. I'm Judi Terzotis, president and publisher of the Times-Picayune, The Advocate, and the Acadiana Advocate. And welcome to the Fall Economic Outlook series. Everywhere you go, it seems people are talking about the economy and how it's impacting their daily lives. Today's panel will cover those topics that are front of mind for all of us as we look forward to the holiday season and 2023. Thank you for watching.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We are going to kick off in a moment our discussion of the state economy. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Rene Sanchez, the new editor of The Advocate and Times-Picayune, the three newsrooms across Southeast Louisiana. I'm a native of Louisiana and am thrilled to be back home and getting the opportunity to lead the newsrooms in discussions like these. And so before we begin, I would like to also turn to my new colleague, Stephanie Riegel. Stephanie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, and thank you so much. I'm also very happy to be here. I'm a new business writer for the New Orleans Advocate, Times-Picayune, but an old journalist in Louisiana. Got my start in New Orleans, and I was with WWL-TV for a long time, and then was up in Baton Rouge for many years after Katrina as editor of the Baton Rouge Business Report. So I'm thrilled to be back in New Orleans, covering the local economy and very many business issues that are of importance to the state.
Thank you, Stephanie. And before we introduce our guests, I'd like to pause for a second and also thank our sponsor, AARP of Louisiana.
AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people to choose how they live as they age. We work to strengthen communities and advocate for what matters most to families, with a focus on health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. Here in Louisiana, we know inflation and the rising cost of insurance, electricity, and gas have hit your pocketbook hard. That's why we're pleased to sponsor today's Economic Summit with The Advocate. Having information about the current economic climate and what's to come is important for families and businesses to protect their finances and plan for the future. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion and connect with us online at aarp.org for more ways to protect your money.
And, as we begin, I would like to introduce, we have three guests with us this morning who generously are offering their time and their wisdom. And I will start with our first guest, Melinda Slott, who is the research director of the Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana. Melinda is an expert on the state budget, knows as much or more as maybe anyone in the state, and is a longtime Associated Press journalist who studies the state's economic trends quite closely. Thank you, Melinda, for joining us today. I would also like to introduce Walt Leger. Walt is the CEO of the nonprofit New Orleans and Company. He is also a former state legislator, so he too has deep experience in thinking about and assessing the state's economic trends and outlook. And last but not least, an economist, Stephen Barnes. Stephen is the director of the Kathleen Blanco Public Policy Institute at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. So we really are appreciative of you all joining us this morning. Looking forward to the discussion. And among the many reasons that Stephanie is here this morning is that, as I said, I am a newcomer, so I'm taking a crash course in the Louisiana economy and its trends. So I'm going to turn to Stephanie first to kick off our discussion. Go ahead, Stephanie. Thank you. Oh, I think you're muted.
I'm so sorry. Just to get started, kind of wanted to get the 30,000-foot view on the state's economy from where you three sit at this point, heading into the fourth quarter and looking ahead to 2023. What's the number one thing on your mind at this point, be it positive, negative, somewhere in between, or just what are you focused on at the moment in terms of our economic outlook, broadly speaking? Dr. Barnes, you want to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I'll say, heading into this pandemic, the Louisiana economy was already really going through a pretty significant transition. We've been talking a lot about the pandemic for the last couple of years. That's still looming large over where we are today, and we're looking anxiously for some continued growth coming out of that pandemic as Louisiana really finds its footing in the broader economic trends and changes that we were starting to think about, but really saw accelerating through those pandemic years.
Walt, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Stephanie and Renee. Thank you for having me this morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. From our point of view, obviously, in the tourism industry for the city of New Orleans, for the region, for the state, we continue to recover from COVID-19, which was devastating to the economy of the world as it relates to tourism. Of course, everyone was impacted by it for a very extended period of time. We are in a rebuilding mode. And 2022 has been a really successful year. Certainly very successful from the leisure travel standpoint. That continues to recover to 2019 levels. And I think our focus at this moment is continuing to rebuild the meetings, convention, conference side of the tourism industry. 2022 has been fantastic so far. We have a really stellar lineup for the fall in 2022 and through the winter season and the holidays. And so we're going to be continued on rebuilding that portion of the economy for out years. We often book these events 5, 6, 7 years in advance. In fact, we're booking events into 2030s at this point and beyond. And so we're going to keep competing. There's tremendous pent up demand in the travel industry as people finally get back on the road and are getting out to see family and friends, and also getting their favorite cities like New Orleans once again. And so we're very optimistic about what that looks like. We still have a ways to go as it relates to the restoration of jobs in the industry, but we're very happy about where things are at this point, and looking forward to continued growth as we move forward.
Guess that means it's my turn. Thank you for having me today. At PAR, I think what we're going to be looking for a lot over the next year or so is how inflation affects the various revenue sources that come into the state's budget. We obviously spend a lot of time looking at state finances, and there are suggestions from the economists. Dr. Barnes could probably talk about this a lot, that perhaps the last fiscal year might have been our high point in terms of revenue, and we may start seeing a little bit of a slowdown in growth that will affect the state's revenue sources. And we have a lot of other things going on at the same time. The federal pandemic relief money will be running out and they've used that to pay for a lot of things across the state budget. And there are also some other tax changes that are on the horizon that will affect the way money flows in the state budget and lessen some of the revenue coming into the state. So we're going to be looking at how that affects programs and services, and what needs to be done. If there are budget gaps, how to address them. And then going forward, how do you protect the services that the state provides to its people?
Stephen, just to follow up on your overview, which areas of the state are really strong right now in terms of growth, like of the 7 major markets, and which ones are really lagging and giving economists and experts some concern?
Well, I think it's, given the tremendous amount of turmoil we've seen with the pandemic, I think it's worth taking a longer view and thinking about where the state was heading into that in early 2020. And we had certainly been through a long stretch where the major metro areas were faring relatively well. The oil and gas industry had been working through some very challenging pricing environment after the 2014 price drop. So that had taken a hit on Lafayette and Houma already. But Baton Rouge was doing well. Lake Charles was benefiting from a huge round of industrial investment, expanding petrochemicals, and New Orleans was doing well on top of that. The pandemic really did change things in a big way, sort of further hit to the oil and gas industry, big upheaval with travel and tourism, and a lot of service sector jobs as well. So we're coming out of that. At this point, we've really only got two regions that have really come out of that pandemic and are currently sitting at an employment level that looks better than it did pre-pandemic. And those are two of the smaller regions in Alexandria and the Hammond metropolitan statistical area. We've seen some good performance from Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and even Shreveport. New Orleans is heading in the right direction, but still has a lot of ground to make up given the big tourism-related losses in hospitality and entertainment. And Lake Charles has a lot going for it, but really still struggling from some of the hurricane recovery, and still a long ways to go there as well.
One question I have is the seismic impact of the pandemic, obviously and overwhelmingly negative. On the back end of it, where's the opportunity? Is there opportunity lurking, or the sense of the green shoots that could emerge at this point, or looking out toward next year, whether it's in the petrochemical industry and as it goes through a significant evolution? Is it from anywhere from that to the sense of the whole country's now sort of getting its mind around the prospect of work from anywhere, and do we have the opportunity to beckon people to work here even if the jobs aren't here? I'm just curious to know where you all think some of the opportunity might be looking out a year or so.
Well, from my perspective, Rene, as it relates to our portion of the economy, I think the work from anywhere, the remote work phenomenon that is obviously not going anywhere, is a huge opportunity. We talk all the time about how wonderful of a place we are to visit, but part of the reason that we're a wonderful place to visit is because we're a great place to live. There's incredible culture here. There's great creativity, great food, great music, the great outdoors, the ability to fish and hunt and do all the other things that people want to do in communities surrounding the city of New Orleans. And I think that those very things are the things that are attractive to people when they choose where they're going to live, even if it's where they're going to live for a 6-month period. For a lot of people who are going to be sort of nomads, they're going to move around and they're going to choose communities to stay and live in for extended periods of time. And I think the opportunity to bring in people who are maybe based in other locations, but will live here in our community or stay here and visit in our community for extended period of time, allows us to bring in tax dollars, everybody's favorite tax dollar, which is somebody else's from somewhere else. And if we can sort of address some of the critical things that we need to address for our community, like infrastructure and public safety and those sorts of things, I think that we have a unlimited opportunity to really bring in visitors for extended periods of time that will ultimately invest in our community with their dollars. And that's something that I think it'll be exciting to see how it plays out. We want to make sure we get broadband right. We need to make sure that we have all the right assets in place, but those opportunities are real. And I think that's real for the city of New Orleans, but I think it's also real for many other communities across the state of Louisiana.
If I could jump in on that topic as well, I would say, picking up on some of Walt's comments, I think the remote work opportunity is real for Louisiana, but I'd really want to underscore the broadband needs that we have in Louisiana, and that includes expanding broadband to communities that currently do not have it at all, but also making sure that we're trying to make smart investments and cultivate a more resilient infrastructure that gives us very high quality broadband that's reliable, high speed, because to make remote work function at a high level, people have to have truly dependable, high speed internet. So I think the state does have some targeted work to do in that space. I know that the state's Office of Broadband Development and Connectivity is leading a charge right now and has really established Louisiana as a leader in trying to capture some of those federal infrastructure dollars that we can bring here to invest in broadband. We at the Blanco Center are helping in that effort with leading a broad collaborative in developing the state's first digital equity plan. So that's an area where a lot of planning is happening now, but certainly something where we've got to make sure we get that right so that we can really maximize on that opportunity. Because I think we have a lot of great cultural assets that we get to leverage, but it only works if we get broadband right. So that's certainly a big one. Briefly, I'll mention two others that you had touched on, Renee, would have been petrochemicals. Absolutely, yes. I think at the opening, I just mentioned briefly the idea of Louisiana already being in somewhat of a transition, and that really being the energy transition. And so we could see some of that starting to happen with big chemical plants making investments to retool and upgrade their facilities, and actually some new greenfield investments that are absolutely touching on and trying to capture this bigger global movement towards renewable and more sustainable chemicals. So that's something where I think Louisiana is certainly poised for growth. We're seeing a lot of success, and I think targeted efforts there will help us to really, again, take full advantage of that one. Last one I'll mention briefly while I've got the floor would be healthcare. Healthcare has been, it has been a strong sector in Louisiana. We've seen a lot of job growth there. I think we're starting to see in a few areas, especially. So New Orleans has had a larger cluster of healthcare. Baton Rouge is cultivating that as well, and Lafayette's cultivating that in a sense where we can not only service the population here, but really provide more specialty care that can serve a population outside of Louisiana as well, and finding those opportunities to see the interplay between higher education, research, and healthcare. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. At UL Lafayette, a little known gem is the new Iberia Research Center, which was instrumental in the development of several of the major COVID-19 vaccines. That's a place that the state is starting to make more targeted investments to enhance that facility and really put the University, Lafayette, and Louisiana as a whole on the map there. So I think there's some new opportunities as well in biopharma and pharmaceutical related manufacturing.
Melinda, is there anything you'd like to add? Go ahead.
I was going to jump in. Dr. Barnes covered several things I was going to suggest, but I will also say I think an area where Louisiana has a huge opportunity to expand is its coastal engineering, coastal sciences, all of the coastal work that is going on here. I mean, we are, as everybody always says, we're the epicenter of climate change. You can see it very real every day here, and Louisiana has a huge opportunity as it's trying to restore its coastline and protect its coastline to also use that to develop new industries. You're seeing that now. I mean, obviously, we also, in the climate change realm, have a lot of opportunities on the solar energy and wind energy fronts as well. And you're seeing a lot of discussion about that locally, globally. The governor has focused on that as well. So I think those are two industry sectors where you can see a lot of growth potential in Louisiana. It's the sort of the tragic side effect of the fact that we're in the middle of, the epicenter of all of these like climate change problems, but there are some good things that can come from it in terms of development of industry.
I feel like we are, like you say, Melinda, we're really sort of at a pivotal moment here, and we could capitalize on it and move in the right direction. But with respect, say, to renewables, and that's a broad term that covers not only truly clean energy like solar and wind, but also these blue and green fuels, say, that can sort of drop into our existing energy infrastructure, which is very exciting. But I mean, I get concerned that maybe there's pushback from traditional petrochem industry that really wants to try to hold on to keeping things the way they are. And do you all see that at the state budget level, Stephen and Melinda, in the legislature and in policy circles? Or, I mean, is everybody really behind embracing this new future that could lie before us?
Well, Dr. Barnes can probably talk more from the industry level. I think you see a lot of these energy companies diversifying globally. They understand where the markets are going, what the reality of the situation is. And so I feel like I don't hear as much pushback from the industry level. You do hear a lot of pushback from the local political level. There are people who obviously have political positions that they are trying to emphasize. But you also have people who just have concerns about farmland being taken up for solar energy farms. and not necessarily providing a lot of jobs, but taking up a lot of agricultural land. So there are some very real concerns that local elected officials have expressed. I think, honestly, it depends on which part of the state you're in terms of how they react to these individual projects, because you see some local parish officials who are clearly embracing these kind of alternative energy ventures in their area, and then others that have shown a lot more pushback and have put moratoriums up. So it's clearly something that has divided people for political reasons and for economic reasons.
Yeah, I would add to that I think there's sort of a conventional wisdom that alternative energy is something that we might look to as at the expense of traditional energy sources, oil and gas. And I think that strong cultural tie that we have in Louisiana to the history of oil and gas can make a lot of people reluctant to looking at this as a new opportunity. But I think it's important that we as Louisianians, the voters, local government, legislators, that we keep an open mind and try to see what the market trends really look like here. And when you look at major global oil and gas companies, almost without exception, they are really rebranding themselves as energy companies, and they are making investments in wind and solar. And in fact, some of them are exploring opportunities right here in Louisiana or in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a real economic driver. I think when a lot of people were first introduced to these technologies, maybe 10 or 20 or even more years back, they were new ideas that were not economical. And so the advocates pushing for those modes of energy development would have been had no other option but to present them as a costly alternative. But the economics have changed. The technology has improved. The prices have come down, and we now see profit-driven, publicly owned companies pursuing these kinds of investments as part of a diversified energy portfolio. So this is a trend that is happening, and I think as Louisiana, we can. We're going to see some of these projects. We're already starting to see some of these projects take place here. I think from a policy standpoint, we can embrace that, plan for it, and again, try to make these new and emerging trends hit here in as big a way as possible. Or if we're reluctant and we're resistant, we may miss out on some opportunities. So I think it's important that we lean into these kinds of trends, especially when we can see them really getting a push at the global scale. This is really happening. And so I want to make sure that we're at the table. And even to a comment Belinda made regarding land use planning for solar, that's a great example of a real concern that pops up when we start to see something new moving at a pretty fast clip. We've got to make sure that we're studying those things, planning for these kinds of developments, and making smart choices so that we can put those solar developments on the types of land that are not crowding out high value agriculture. But I think that's a problem we can solve.
Yeah, and I would add, I agree with both of the takes that have just been shared on this. And I would also say that we've come a long way as a state. If you look at 2010, 2011, 2012, we were fighting about solar tax credits and other policy areas where there was distinct pushback from industry about moving towards renewables and new energy types. And I think that it is very, very clear that the view of fossil fuels and the view of oil and gas in Louisiana has definitely lagged behind the rest of the world. And it makes sense that it would. It's a critical part of our economy for a very long time, and it continues to be. But as things have changed globally, it is very clear that the viewpoints have changed here in Louisiana as well. And the opportunities are just too significant to pass up. And so when you see manufacturers and other service providers in the oil and gas industry also shifting towards the ability to manufacture, windmills, to factor turbines, to manufacture other things that will be utilized in the development of renewables, then I think it becomes very clear that they're reading the tea leaves as well. They're watching the marketplace and they're shifting their investments to try to take advantage of the next round. My hope is that we'll do exactly what Stephen referenced, which is lean in on this and continue to push forward. Companies like Amazon and others are seeking to have carbon neutral distribution of their products. And so what that means is we need ships that have less emissions, that have clean emissions. We need our port facilities to be functioning at the highest level and as efficiently as possible. And we need to continue to upgrade our logistical framework and infrastructure to be able to service companies like that who are under intense pressure and are now reporting on their sustainability, on their carbon footprint, and on other things that impact their bottom line now with their shareholders. So I think it's an exciting time for us from an educational institution standpoint, and also from a clean energy standpoint to really shift into the next generation. The oil and gas industry is not really going anywhere tomorrow. And I think it's critical that we stay focused on this transition that's underway and that we participate in the transition so that we're not caught at the end of it looking back and wondering, what happened.
I have a question. Earlier I asked about opportunity. I'd like to flip that and ask each of you about the headwinds you see, about the threats you see. What worries you as Louisiana tries to grow and diversify its economy? And, I don't have a particular thing to tag. I wonder about things, from infrastructure or broadband to, public safety, to the lack of the workforce needed, to the regional competitors, and not just the obvious one, maybe like in Austin, Texas, but these emergent competitors. I think I would cite maybe Nashville. I'm not sure if I'm right about that, but I'm curious to know your take on threats and headwinds, and is the elected official class attuned and vigilant to those threats?
I'll jump in and start out, and I think that it's both a concern but also a massive opportunity. I mean, when you look to the amount of infrastructure dollars that are available from the federal government right now, unprecedented isn't even the right word. It's just a remarkably large amount of money available for things like broadband, for connectivity, for intercity rail, for the development of new port infrastructure. My concern is that we won't fully capitalize on that, and the challenge will be the same one that we seem to struggle with generation after generation, which is parochialism. And the lack of the ability to come together as a broader region and as a broader state to develop a clear vision on how we put together the resources that we need to invest in the infrastructure that we need in a modern economy, to get to a point where when investments in Shreveport are recognized as a win for people in New Orleans, and to get to a point where investments in New Orleans are recognized as a win for people in Shreveport, because we're really a lot more connected than anybody wants to admit. And furthermore, I think the idea that we can, with this transformational amount of money available, we can really connect the economies and the cities of New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Lake Charles into a true super region. That's where we can really be competitive when we start thinking like that. Our state is small. It's 4.3 million people. There are cities in our super regional area that dwarf us in population size. So we really need to be in this together. We need a strategic plan from the state level and also from our local leaders that we can get together on, so that we can take advantage of this generational opportunity to invest in infrastructure. Because if we don't, we truly will be left behind. The airport that we've got here in New Orleans now is world class. It's being recognized as that. It's the only major airport within 350 miles. But we've got to figure out new ways to connect other people in our state, and frankly in Mississippi and Alabama and Florida and Texas, to our airport and to our communities in innovative ways. So my fear is that we won't come together and strategically make those investments, but it's a huge opportunity if we can harness our collective will to really get us on the right track for the future.
Yes, I'll jump in on this one. I think, Rene, you listed a lot of the things that are historic problems for Louisiana. that are continuing problems for Louisiana and that need to be addressed in order to harness all the economic potential the state has. I mean, we have workforce issues. We have an undereducated population. We have infrastructure problems. We have public safety issues. All of those things impact whether a business wants to locate here, whether employees want to live here. And all of those things are perpetual problems for Louisiana. I will say, I'm not necessarily always in the business of giving a lot of credit to politicians, but they have recently taken a lot of the pandemic money, both the governor and the legislature, and used it to try and make important infrastructure investments that I think can be helpful. Hundreds of millions of dollars into water and sewage systems, hundreds of millions of dollars into road and bridge work, and some of these mega projects that have been on the books for decades, generations. They're also investing money in education. Now, we obviously cut a lot of money from education as a state, over the last 15 or so years, and they've spent this term trying to rebuild some of that and fill in some of those gaps. And they're dedicating money to workforce development issues. So they are clearly understanding that, you need to figure out how to address these problems, but these are systemic problems that the state has had for so long that it will take a long time to fix them as well. So I don't want to be the Debbie Downer of the discussion, but we do have a lot of challenges as a state, and we haven't historically done a very good job of addressing those.
Yeah, I'm largely going to just echo and reinforce what's already been said, because I think those are the big ones. But I would add, when we think about infrastructure, Baton Rouge shows up as one of the worst cities for traffic in the entire United States. We've got bridges suffering from decades of underinvestment, and we put a policy brief together on infrastructure a couple of years ago at the Blanco Center. When you look at the percentage of roads and bridges in disrepair, Louisiana shows up at or near the top of many of those lists, depending on how you cut the data. Once you control for the size of that state and you really get an appreciation for what might that look like for someone living in the state, or the user's experience in terms of infrastructure, we are such an outlier that it's an embarrassment. The percentage of our roads relative to the size of our state that are bridges that are in serious disrepair is about 9 times worse than Alabama or Texas, about 3 times worse than Mississippi. There's nobody in our region that has the same level of challenges. So to Melinda's point, I think we're making some smart decisions right now. We can look back over the last few years. We've made some big investments, but we're going to have to stay the course for a long time to make up for decades of underinvestment. And the same is absolutely true with education. And when we think about the traditional approach to growing the economy, recruiting businesses has been kind of a real central focus. And trying to sell our local communities when we have public school systems that a lot of people have questions about or don't have confidence in. We've got big investments that we need to make there. So and those are big changes. That's not just coming up with a little bit more tax revenue to give teachers a small raise. That's important, but we've actually got to go bigger. I think we've got to think about really taking our education system seriously, K-12 and higher ed. Again, we're making progress, but when we think about, especially now, the increased importance of these kinds of community attributes in a world of remote work, where the workers get to really pick a community that they feel comfortable in, we have such great assets. When we talk about the culture, the quality of life, there's a lot that we have going for us. And I think if we can complement that with the right kinds of state and local investments to try to make sure that we're addressing infrastructure, education, public safety, I think that's going to put Louisiana on a very different growth trajectory. And so I think there's huge opportunity there. We got to make sure we can overcome those obstacles.
If I can just ask Melinda to drill down a little bit more, just for those of us that aren't following the state budget discussions that closely, what, if you can just think of a couple of specifics, did legislators really do in 2022 with the federal influx of dollars that we should expect to see pay off in the long term. And I know Jay Darden said earlier this week that it looks like 2023 is going to be good, but as you alluded to at the beginning of your remarks, this might be the end of the windfall years, and we could be back to facing some really austerity pictures in the not too distant future.
Right. Well, I'll say a couple of things. It's not that we're necessarily looking at austerity on the horizon. It's just we've had so much money coming in from the feds right now. And there's been arguably inflated revenue at the state level from people getting those pandemic checks and hurricane recovery. Whenever there's a major storm, people spend a lot of money, recovery money, and they're replacing things. And so you get tax revenue that is, sort of temporary in nature because those things level off over time. But what I can say in terms of what they did is, for example, they had about $1.4 billion in just flexible pandemic relief money this last session that they could spend. They put $450 million into water and sewer system upgrades. They spent $500 million to replenish the unemployment trust fund, which I know seems very wonky and people have disagreements about the impact of that. But what that did is it made sure that businesses didn't have to pay higher taxes to pay into the fund and that unemployment benefits didn't drop for the people who were receiving them. They've spent a couple $100 million on clearing out some of the debts owed to FEMA for hurricane recovery stemming back from years. So that means that debt is off the books and it leaves the next administration not having to deal with that kind of stuff. But other things that they did, they earmarked $300 million for a new bridge in the Baton Rouge area. Now, granted, that's a drop in the bucket to the $2 billion that thing is expected to cost, but that's the first sizable amount of money they've actually dedicated to it. They put $200 million towards the new I-10 bridge in Calcasieu Parish. They put a couple $100 million towards the development of I-49 South in the Lafayette region. They put $120 million towards coastal restoration projects. So all these things are really needed infrastructure improvements and upgrades and things that have been on the drawing board for a long time. So those are all really great things. I mean, I could hit them for the fact that they spent $100 million on pet projects that arguably shouldn't be this state's priorities. But generally speaking, if you look at all this excess money that they had both on the state and federal level, they've made some pretty significant investments in areas of need.
Something else I wanted to see what you all thought about, when you think about the sectors that drive the state's economy, we've talked about one, the petrochemical industry and how it's evolving. Another that leaps to my mind, and partly because as a native who's lived away for a long time, as someone who's lived away, what I have seen about 10,000 times is when you tell someone that you are from Louisiana, you have to almost hold a press conference about their questions about how to visit and what should they see, where should they eat. And I feel like I've been, representing the state in that front for a long time. The question I have is, when you think of the sector of tourism and hospitality, how fragile is that now? I mean, we talked about obviously some opportunity. I'm curious about the fragility of it and how, as part of the state's economic engine, that is maximized.
So I think it's important to look at a lot of the positive signs that we're seeing here in the city with significant investments by multinational corporations in our city and in the infrastructure of the city. When you think about the Four Seasons project, when you think about Caesars Entertainment and their commitment to a $350 million expansion of a new hotel tower, and when you think about the hundreds of millions that hotel properties have spent in the last few years and are spending into the future on renovations and restorations, companies like that don't make decisions without being really thoughtful about it. They don't have money to burn. Many of them have shareholders that they have to report to, and they make investments based on their projections and on what they're seeing. And so I can tell you that just yesterday, Our team was lining up a couple of weeks of travel in Frankfurt, and then in London, and then in Paris for a few days with our international customers. And there was so much demand for our international customers to meet with us that we can't fulfill all of the time slots. So we have tremendous draw to people. We continue to, and we expect that this is going to be continue to be strong into the future. And we're hopeful that we'll continue to bring in more international visitors, because that is a great visitor that stays a little bit longer and spends a little bit more. We see similar growth in the cruise industry here through the Port of New Orleans, with actually more ships and more cruises than we had before the pandemic. So not only have they come back, but they've also added to that rotation of cruise business. So, I think we see a lot of that strength returning to the industry. What we're really focused on at New Orleans and Company right now, though, is as we spread our nationwide brand and our campaign, is elevating the conversation about the city, bringing in more corporate business, focusing on meetings that are really meaningful and have a purpose and that can add to the economic vitality of the region. So, for example, we had the American Association for Cancer Research recently, one of the largest meetings in the country back in April, trying to connect them to some of our medical schools and our centers of research here is important for us. It was exciting also to have the American Diabetes Association, which had a special meeting with Pennington Biomedical Research Facility in Baton Rouge while they were here to talk about ways they could partner to do extensive research. Obviously, having groups like that do coastal restoration work, the Water Environment Federation will be here with us in the fall, talking about the very things that we're all talking about, and celebrating things like our Louisiana's Coastal Master Plan, which is one of the best plans in the world as it relates to dealing with climate change, based on science and not as much based on politics. So trying to celebrate those things as we tell the story of, continue to tell the story of the rich culture, but also elevate the conversation, tell people about the Water Institute of the Gulf, for example, and the incredible work that they're doing. So, doing everything we can to elevate the great work that's happening here in the state, as we're also reminding people about the incredible culture, is, I think, a great mission, and one that our team takes seriously, and feels like will lay a foundation for future economic growth for the city, region, and state.
Well, Walt, if I can follow up on that, how, and we talked a little bit about this earlier this week, but like New Orleans really took it on the chin last week with the Wall Street Journal front page story, and with other national media spotlighting our public safety issues, the crime, some of the political controversies going on in the city. How does that affect not just the hospitality industry, but Stephen and Melinda, more broadly, economic development activities? Because maybe people really are always going to want to come to New Orleans, and they'll roll the dice and take their chance, but they don't have to move here long term. And you alluded to, the sort of the gig economy and the remote workforce being able to come and stay for a spell. But when you're talking about families who are going to invest here for the long term, you need the good schools and everything, and you need safe communities. So how does this negative publicity make your job and the job of the economic development folks more challenging? Or
Well,
is it flash in the pan?
Perception is reality, and we all recognize that in business and politics and tourism and anything that you want to talk about. Perception is reality, and so headlines like that certainly don't help. And what I think that what we really want is what everyone else wants. They want a safe place to live with good infrastructure, and if we can deliver that for the people of the city and for the people who work in the city, well, then the tourism economy will take care of itself. And I think the economic development aspects that we all kind of chase and are seeking will also take care of themselves. So, the fortunate thing is, I think we know what needs to be done. But as Melinda said, we've struggled to achieve those things. And so I think she was right on the money when she said that it takes time. It took, after Hurricane Katrina, we obviously took it on the chin. And so we started rebuilding. And one of the ways that that happened was investment in higher education, pay raises for public school teachers. And we were reaching the Southern regional average as it related to paying our teachers and also our funding for higher education. It took about 8 years to dismantle those things. And for 4 years of this governor's service, we at the legislature fought about how to stabilize the budget situation. And that finally was achieved toward the end of that 4-year term. And so this 4-year term, as Melinda has said, this 4-year term of the legislature and the governor has been focused on doing some really great big things, investing in teacher pay raises, investing in early childhood education in a way that there's never been investment before, and beginning to restore some of the investments in higher education. But it's important to note, and I don't think that everything is about who the politicians are that run the state or run the city. That's really not everything here. I mean, you need a thriving business community as well, but you also do need time. And so if we're happy that the legislatures have made key investments, then what you hope is that over the next 4 years or the next 8 years, that those investments will continue. We've seen the economic harm that came from disinvesting in education and disinvesting in infrastructure. I think it takes time, and Stephen can speak to this, it takes time to see the benefits of these investments. So we can't stop making them because we're not necessarily seeing the return on that investment tomorrow. We're going to get the return on investment next year and the year after that and the year after that. But if you stop these investments, you don't sustain them, then you simply lose ground. And so I think Melinda and Stephen have both spoken about it, and I couldn't agree more. It's about sustained investment in those things. And that's going to take another term of office for a new legislature and a new governor. And then the one after that, you can't backslide. You have to keep going forward.
Stephanie, it's almost like you anticipated what I was about to say, which is, I think one of the, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm in the negative Nancy of all of this little group today, but the, crime is in the forefront of people's minds right now, and public safety issues. And that can be a problem to getting people to want to move here, getting people to want to work here, getting companies to want to locate here. If most of the headlines you see out of Louisiana right now are New Orleans and it's carjackings, and Baton Rouge had an LSU student just get murdered. You have a lot of negative news coverage coming out of here because of some of the crime issues we have. Now, obviously, that is a national problem too. You are seeing crime rates grow across the country. And people who study these things will remind you that they are still not as high as they once were. And I feel like that caveat needs to be put in there. But clearly that is at the forefront of people's minds, and that is going to be something they use to calculate, life decisions. I will say Louisiana does have a lot of things to offer that no other states will have: the culture, the food, the music, the fun, the festivals, all of those great things. And that is always going to be a draw. We also have hurricanes. And I think the fact that the state has been battered repeatedly by storms in the last few years would also be a drawback to trying to attract some people to want to live here as they look at the headlines that come out of here and the destruction that they've seen. So I think all of those are challenges. I'm not suggesting they can't be overcome and addressed, as Walt talked about, with long-term investments and a focus on it. But we do need to acknowledge that those are the perceptions that people see, and that those can influence business decisions, economic development decisions, and worker decisions.
I want to give Stephen a chance to answer that, but Melinda, just to follow up on that, what do you think the state, when it looks out at these economic challenges or opportunities, needs to do with regards to insurance, right? And the extent to which that problem could be debilitating, both for business and families?
Well, I'm not sure it's entirely a problem the state can solve, particularly because flood insurance rates are becoming unaffordable, not because of any decision made at the state level, but because of decisions made at the federal level. I do think at some point Congress might want to get involved, particularly in the flood insurance issue, because it's not just affecting a handful of states, it's affecting a lot of states. And FEMA hasn't entirely been very forthcoming about what those rate increases actually mean. And I think as more and more people understand what happens, it can when you talk to insurance experts and housing experts, they say things like the rising cost of flood insurance and regular homeowner insurance can essentially crater an entire industry, can crater the homeowner industry and the mortgage industry. And you can essentially make housing so unaffordable that it's impossible to have people live in places where they work. On the state level, they can do things about attracting the insurance industry more. I think you see the insurance department trying to figure out if they can get together a grant program like they did post Katrina and Rita to see if that can draw companies to write more policies in Louisiana. I mean, they obviously created the Citizens Insurance Corporation to try and help people who couldn't get insurance on the private market, but they will acknowledge that that's not the best place to have people get insurance. So I think you're going to need more than just a state level intervention. You're going to need some federal policies and state policies. And you can tell that the legislature is sensitive to that fact and is starting to be very aware of the affordability issues as it involves insurance. I'm just not sure they've come to an understanding of how to fix it.
Stephen, anything you'd like to add to that earlier question?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot, and I generally do agree with everything we heard from Walt and Melinda on this topic. I would add, I think, to kind of accompany and perhaps reinforce this idea of sustained investments, that it's important that we step back and reflect on this is 2022. We've got incredible tools at our disposal to help us track, understand, and communicate what some of these challenges look like, and then be able to measure the progress so that we can help maintain the focus on these issues. I think what's critical is that we make sure we know what the big challenges are, and we can start to make progress, and we've got to make sure we don't take our eye off that ball. And so this is something that we've tried to integrate into a lot of the work that we're doing at the Blanco Center. We're doing a lot of work with the State Department of Child and Family Services, and a centerpiece of that is really putting together some data series that we can track over time, that we can share with the agency, so that it's easier moving forward to really see where progress is being made and where it's not, and know that we need to address those things. We're doing something similar with One Acadiana in the Lafayette area as part of their Vibrant Acadiana initiative to really invest and cultivate the quality of life. Right. Again, there's a lot of great cultural assets in the Lafayette area, but some of the similar challenges of progress needs to be made on the education front, concerns around criminal justice, and so that's something that we've put together, the Vibrant Communities Dashboard for Acadiana, where we're helping the region and community leaders really keep their eyes on the ball and track these things over time. So I think that's something that can be really valuable, and that we should cultivate throughout the state. I know in the New Orleans area, Doug Harris at Tulane leads the Education Research Alliance. And they've done an incredible amount of research trying to really track and understand how all of the changes in the K-12 system post-Katrina have really impacted learning and outcomes, and they're continuing to explore as many different avenues to really see what's working. And again, when it's not, we know things need to change. So I think there's a great opportunity for the research community to support the local government and state government decision making, and to make sure that this kind of information is available to the public as well. So I think transparency is a big part of this too.
One thing I want to bring up, I know we're almost out of time, y'all, but we've alluded to workforce challenges, but every business you talk to, big, small, and in between, is still desperately trying to get employees. Do you all see that improving in the fourth quarter and in 2023? Do we really have a handle on what the dynamics are that are still keeping people away from work, besides pandemic fears?
I'm happy to offer a first comment here, which is to say that it does seem to be that we're facing unprecedented challenges with this pandemic. the federal government here, as did many other governments around the world, stepped in with a very large scale response. And, in real time, it's hard to get those things calibrated just right and make sure that we're giving each person just the right amount of money to keep their heads above water during a temporary downturn like that. What we are seeing in retrospect is that was enough money to leave to let a lot of families pay off debts, even accumulate some savings. And I think those same underlying forces that are contributing to high inflation today are taking a lot of the pressure off people getting back into jobs that they might not have been as excited about or interested in. I think that it's really going to be a matter of time before we see the normal economic pressures start to push more people back into the labor market. But that it was a very unique event. It gave people an opportunity to rethink what they're doing. I think a lot of people, some people went back to school. A lot of people thought about opening businesses. We saw a huge spike in new business starts, which has stayed relatively high. So we're not quite back into that normalized environment, but I think that will settle down, and not quite the same metric, but I'd say keep your eyes on those inflation numbers, and you're going to get a sense of what's happening to household budgets, and when people start to really tighten the belt, that same trigger is going to be pushing a lot of either formerly employed people or people who had stepped out of the labor market, get them back in the labor market looking for some income. So.
Yeah, and in our industry in the region, there were 93,000 jobs in the hospitality industry before the pandemic. There are about 77,800 people working in the greater New Orleans area and the hospitality area now. So it's about 16,000 jobs off from that number in 2019. And it took many years for that number to grow up to that level. And so in our industry, there's certainly our businesses are still looking for workers, but there's also been an adjustment, and it's clear that they're operating as well as they can. And we're hosting great events like Final Fours and Jazz Fest and major conferences and conventions. So I think there's been an adjustment, and as Stephen referenced, I think it will continue to evolve over time, and jobs will come back when they come back. But I think at this point, it appears clear to me that there's just sort of been an adjustment to a new normal, and that's how the industry is going to operate for the time being. I do think one of the things we have at our disposal is an incredible community and technical college system in the state of Louisiana, and that is going to be as important as ever that we invest in that we partner with businesses to create the workers that are needed to meet these demands for new jobs. And I think it's really been a high point for the state over the last 20 years. It's something that I hope we'll continue to invest in, and I think it'll help us generally to restore the labor market in the state.
Well, I'll try and take a quick stab at this because I know we're running out of time. I mean, I would say it's worth noting that our unemployment rate is actually pretty low right now in the state. It's at 3.5%, which is below the national unemployment rate at this point. And I think that economists are still trying to figure out what exactly is happening with the labor market. It is a strange thing, and I'm not sure there's any one individual driver. It's a lot of people's individual decisions, and the pandemic gave them time and in some instances some money to think through if they want to change what they're doing for a living and their life trajectory. But in terms of nailing down what exactly is the cause and how to address that, I think people are still trying to work through that. But I do think, as folks said a little while ago, inflation will suss out some of this and may bring more people back into the labor market who might not otherwise immediately be looking for jobs right now. They may return as their household budgets get stretched and as they feel the pain of inflationary increases. So, but I think it's all still a little bit too early to really understand what's causing all of the disruption and where those workers have gone.
Thank you, Melinda. And yeah, it looks like we're about to hit our mark on time. I really want to thank you, Melinda, Walt, Stephen, and of course, Stephanie, who knows so much more about these issues as I try to catch up. Great discussion, a lot to reflect on. And I think the perspective you all have offered really sort of points the way forward for our readers, our viewers, to think about as we pivot toward not just the fall, but the next year of the economy. So thank you all very much for so generously, not just giving your perspective, but your time as well. Really appreciate it, and so glad to have you with us this morning. So, and thanks to everyone for listening to the discussion this morning. You will see our coverage reflected each and every week. So with that, we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.